the final hours before his crucifixion, Jesus stood before Herod Antipas, one of the most powerful men in Judea. Despite being handed over to a ruler who eagerly asked him questions at considerable length, Jesus refused to give him a single word. This total silence is completely unique in the entire Passion narrative. However, this lack of words was not simple indifference. It was the most calculated, deliberate, and theologically loaded response in the Gospels, a verdict dressed as a pause. In this video, we will explore exactly what it was about Herod Antipas that produced this profound silence, and uncover why a king looking for a miraculous performance received nothing but an echoing question. There is a man in this room with more power than almost anyone else in Judea. He is Herod Antipas, tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, son of Herod the Great, a man who has been navigating the intersection of Roman political authority and Jewish religious expectation his entire adult life. He commands soldiers, he controls territory, he has a palace in Jerusalem and another in Tiberias, and the kind of influence that makes Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect, think it is worth sending a prisoner to him for evaluation, rather than simply making a decision himself. He has just been handed Jesus of Nazareth, and Jesus will not give him a single word, not one, not a defense, not a denial, not a statement of identity or authority or intention. The man who held extended conversations with Nicodemus in the dark, and the Samaritan woman at noon, and the disciples for 3 years on every road they walked together, that man stands in Herod's palace and produces nothing. Not one syllable. Herod asks him many questions, Luke says, at considerable length, and Jesus answers him nothing. What is it about Herod Antipas that produces the only total silence in the entire Passion narrative? That is the question this video was built to answer. And the answer is not simple indifference. The silence of Jesus before Herod is the most calculated, deliberate, theologically loaded silence in the gospel accounts. It is a verdict dressed as a pause, and it changes the way you understand how Jesus gives his words. You need to know who Herod Antipas is before you can understand what the silence means. He is not Herod the Great, the one who killed the children of Bethlehem, the one who was genuinely afraid of the infant king and genuinely tried to have him killed. Herod the Great was dangerous in a different way. He was afraid. Fear makes people do unpredictable things, and a terrified king with unlimited power is a specific kind of threat. Herod Antipas inherited some of his father's ruthlessness, but not his fear. What Herod Antipas has instead of fear is something in some ways worse: curiosity without consequence. Luke 9:9 gives us the first window into who Herod is with regard to Jesus. The Galilean ministry is growing: healings, the feeding of the 5,000, the 12 being sent out 2 by 2, and the rumors have reached Herod's court. People are saying, this might be Elijah, or one of the prophets of old risen again. And Herod says something that tells you everything about him. John I beheaded, but who is this man about whom I hear such things? John I beheaded. He says it like a fact, like a completed administrative task, not with guilt, or at least not with guilt he is willing to acknowledge in front of his court. He beheaded John the Baptist, John who had come to him preaching repentance, John who had told him, specifically and publicly, that his marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias, was unlawful. John who had been locked in Herod's prison, and whom, Luke tells us elsewhere, Herod had protected from Herodias, even listened to with fascination, even been disturbed by. And then came the birthday party, the dancing girl, the rash promise made in front of guests that Herod did not want to break in public. And John's head arrived on a platter. What remains afterward, what Herod has been left with ever since, is a curiosity that has nowhere to go. He has silenced the one voice that was calling him to something. He has killed the prophet. And now there is this Jesus of Nazareth who keeps doing things that sound like what John described, and Herod wants to see him. Stay with me, because the psychology of this matters for the silence. Herod's relationship to Jesus has passed through 3 stages. The first is fear. When the early reports reached him, he was afraid Jesus might be John raised from the dead. The guilty conscience of a man who has silenced a prophet turns every rumor about a new prophet into a haunting. The second is the desire to kill. Luke 13 verse 31 tells us that some Pharisees came to Jesus with a warning: "Get out of here. Herod wants to kill you. Jesus' response is one of the most remarkable lines he speaks in any gospel. Go and tell that fox, not that king, not that ruler, not that man, that fox. In the animal hierarchy of the ancient world, a fox was not a lion or an eagle or anything that commanded respect. A fox was clever, yes, but cunning of a particular kind, the low opportunistic cunning of a small animal that cannot overpower anything and so must outwit it instead. A fox worked the margins. A fox took what it could find when nothing larger was watching. A fox was not, ultimately, something to be afraid of or something to engage with as an equal. Jesus looks at the political power of Herod Antipas and sees not a lion, but a fox. And then the third stage arrives. Herod is in Jerusalem for Passover when the arrest happens. Pilate sends Jesus to him, and Herod's fear has dissolved, and his desire to kill has receded. And what remains, what is calcified in its place over the years since John's beheading, is pure, uncomplicated theatrical curiosity. He wants to see a miracle, not to believe, not to repent, not to find out the truth about who Jesus is or what the kingdom of God might mean for his governance. He wants to see something impressive. He is, Luke records, greatly pleased to see Jesus. The word carries the sense of theatrical delight, the excitement of someone who has finally gotten tickets to a show they have been wanting to see for years. He asks many questions. At considerable length, he is prompting a performance. Come on, do something. Heal someone. Speak a word of power. Give me the sign, the semeion, that everyone has been talking about. And Jesus stands in the middle of all of it and says nothing, not one word. The chief priests and scribes who have come along are accusing him vigorously, eutanos, the Greek says, vehemently, with everything they have, and still Jesus says nothing. The accusations pile up. Herod's questions accumulate. The room fills with noise aimed at a man who is producing none of it. And Herod, denied the performance he came for, does what powerful people do when they have been denied something they expected. He mocks him. He and his soldiers treat Jesus with contempt, dress him in an elegant robe, a costume, the kind of thing you put on someone you have decided is not worthy of serious engagement, and send him back to Pilate. Luke adds a detail that looks almost incidental. That day Herod and Pilate became friends with each other, for before this they had been enemies. The silence of Jesus reconciles two men who were rivals, at his own expense, without saying a word. The silence of Jesus before Herod is unique in the Passion narrative. Not just unusual, unique. Jesus speaks to Pilate more than once, including the most philosophically charged exchange in any of the four Gospels, the conversation about truth and authority and the nature of kingdoms. Jesus speaks under oath to Caiaphas, and what he says when the high priest invokes the name of the living God is one of the most comprehensive declarations of his identity in all four Gospels. Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem on the road to the cross. Jesus speaks to the thief on the cross next to him. Jesus speaks from the cross itself 7 times. Before Herod, there is nothing, not one word. Luke records the silence with the same deliberateness with which he records everything else. He questioned him at great length, but he answered him nothing. The silence is not the same in every case. Before Pilate, Jesus chooses not to answer specific charges. But when Pilate asks a direct question about his identity and kingship, Jesus responds. The silence is selective. Before Herod, it is total. And the distinction between selective silence before Pilate and total silence before Herod is the key that unlocks this entire scene. So why? There are 3 reasons. Each one is deeper than the one before it. The first reason is the simplest. Jesus called Herod a fox. Luke 13, verse 32. Go and tell that fox. The Greek is allopex, fox. The only derogatory term Jesus uses for any named individual in the entire gospel accounts. In the cultural imagination of the ancient world, a fox was not the noble predator of the natural order. A fox was cunning, yes, but cunning of a particular kind. A fox worked the margins. A fox was not, ultimately, something to be feared or engaged with as an equal. Jesus sees Herod, the tetrarch, the son of Herod the Great, the man with soldiers and palaces and Roman backing and the authority to execute prophets, and sees a fox. You do not explain yourself to a fox. A fox cannot receive what Jesus would give. Not because Jesus is unwilling. He has given his words freely to prostitutes and tax collectors and lepers and Gentile soldiers and Samaritan women and everyone else the religious hierarchy of his day had written off. But those people came with genuine need and genuine hunger. A fox comes for scraps, and Jesus does not perform for scavengers. This is the first reason, but it is not the deepest one. The second reason requires you to remember something. Herod Antipas is the man who beheaded John the Baptist, not abstractly, not as a political calculation made at a distance, at a birthday party, because a girl danced well and he made a rash promise in front of guests and found himself having to choose between his prophet. He chose his pride, and John's head arrived on a platter. John the Baptist was the forerunner, the one crying in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." His entire existence was oriented around pointing toward Jesus. John was the voice. Jesus was the word. And Herod silenced the voice. The last sound John heard on earth was probably the sound of footsteps coming for him in the prison where Herod had locked him. The last thing the forerunner experienced before he died was the consequence of Herod's choice at a birthday party. And now Jesus is standing in front of that man. He is standing before the person who killed his cousin, the person who silenced the voice that spent its entire existence preparing the world for the word. Herod silenced John the Baptist with a sword. Jesus silences himself before Herod voluntarily. Two silences. One forced on a prophet who deserved to speak. One chosen by a Messiah who had every right to speak. And in the space between those two silences, in the gap between what Herod did to John and what Jesus now does before Herod, is the fulfillment of a prophecy written 7 centuries earlier. Isaiah 53, verse 7. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. The lamb is silent before its shearers, not because the lamb has nothing to say, not because the lamb is afraid, because the lamb is the lamb. And what the lamb is in this moment is not the judge, but the judged, the one who absorbs in silence. But here's the thing about Isaiah 53 and the silence before Herod that most people miss. Isaiah 53 describes a total, encompassing silence. Yet Jesus speaks to Pilate, to Caiaphas, to the thief, to his mother. The Isaiah silence does not apply uniformly across the Passion narrative. It lands fully, completely, without exception, before Herod. Which means Herod's court is the place in the Passion narrative where Jesus is most completely the silent lamb. Not by coincidence, by recognition. The lamb is silent before the shearer. Herod is the shearer, the one who has already taken one life that was not his to take, who has already demonstrated what he does with the voices he receives. He cuts them off. The third reason is the most important, and it is the one that has the most to say to you. Herod does not want Jesus. He wants what Jesus can do. This is a distinction that sounds small and is actually enormous. He wants a semeion, a sign, a miracle, a demonstration of power he can observe from a comfortable distance without being changed by it. He has been hearing about these signs for years, and he has wanted to see them the way a man wants to see a famous performer he has only heard described. Not to know the performer, to see the performance. And this distinction between wanting Jesus and wanting what Jesus produces is the line that separates everyone in the Passion narrative who receives a word from the one who receives none. Pay attention to who gets a response in those final hours. Pilate gets a response because Pilate is asking a genuine question. What is truth is not the question of a man who has already decided what the answer is. It is the question of a man whose grip on reality has been loosened by the person standing in front of him. Pilate is genuinely confused. Genuine confusion produces genuine answers. Caiaphas gets a response because Caiaphas invokes the name of the living God. The high priest puts Jesus under the most solemn oath available in Jewish law, and Jesus, who has been selective about his silences all the way through, will not be silent when the name of the Father is used to demand an answer about his identity. You have said so, but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The thief on the cross gets a response because the thief is not asking for a performance. He is not asking for proof. He is asking for presence. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And genuine need directed at the right person always receives an answer. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Herod asked for a sign. A sign performed for someone who has no interest in what the sign points to is not a sign. It is a circus act. And the Son of God does not perform circus acts for foxes. There is a difference between wanting Jesus and wanting what Jesus can give you. The woman who touched the hem of his garment wanted to be healed, but she was desperate, genuinely desperate. 12 years of desperate, and her desperation had nowhere else to go. The blind Bartimaeus shouts from the roadside, not because he wants to see a miracle, but because he wants to see. And there is a difference between wanting the experience of healing and wanting the absence of blindness. He addresses the one he believes can heal him by a messianic title, Son of David, before he has any evidence that the one coming down the road will stop. Herod wants the experience. He is not blind. He is not desperate. He is comfortable, curious, and powerful. And comfortable curiosity directed at Jesus produces the same thing it produced in Herod's palace: silence. Now step back from the palace and look at what this silence is actually doing. He is the only free person in that palace, not Herod, who has a lifetime of choices behind him that have narrowed his options down to curiosity and contempt. Not Pilate, caught between Roman political demands and the conscience that keeps telling him this prisoner is innocent. Not the chief priests and scribes, so invested in the outcome they have chosen that they will shout vehemently in a foreign king's court to get it. Jesus stands in the middle of all of it, saying nothing, and is the only free person in the room. Here is what most people miss about the silence before Herod, and it is the most important thing in this entire video. The silence is not cruelty. It feels like cruelty. It looks like cruelty. A man with power and the ability to at least slow down what is coming. Jesus has performed miracles for all kinds of people in all kinds of circumstances. Surely he could give Herod something. Surely a word or a gesture or a sign would cost him nothing. And yet he gives him nothing. But cruelty would be the wrong word. Because if Jesus had performed a miracle for Herod, what would that have meant? It would have meant that theatrical curiosity is sufficient. It would have meant that wanting to see Jesus is the same kind of thing as genuinely seeking Jesus. It would have meant that the distance between Herod's comfortable, consequence-free interest in signs and the desperation of the bleeding woman who crawled through a crowd to touch his garment, that distance does not matter. That they are the same kind of approach and deserve the same kind of response. They are not the same, and Jesus refuses to pretend they are. The silence is mercy wearing a mask that does not look like mercy. Stay with me, because this is the point that changes the way you read the silence. Not just Herod's silence, but any silence that has felt like God withholding something from you. Herod has had every opportunity to encounter Jesus on different terms. The reports have been reaching his court for years. The healings in Galilee, which is his territory. The teaching that drew thousands of people to hillsides and lake shores and synagogues across the region he governs. He heard all of it and changed nothing. And so when Jesus stands in his palace, finally present, finally in the same room, the silence is not Jesus refusing to engage with Herod. The silence is Jesus acknowledging that Herod has already had the engagement and has already decided what to do with it. The silence before Herod is not the absence of words. It is the verdict on all the words that were already available. And Herod sent them back unopened. Now the pattern completes. Herod silenced John the Baptist with a sword. John's voice, the voice crying in the wilderness, prepared the way, was cut off by the same man now standing in front of Jesus, demanding a performance. And Jesus, the one whose way John was preparing, honors the silence of his forerunner by choosing his own. John was silenced by Herod. Jesus is silent before Herod. The last sound of the forerunner and the chosen silence of the word are connected across the span of that palace in a way that no one in the room, except Jesus, understands. And then the most remarkable thing in this scene happens. Not the miracle that did not occur. The most remarkable thing is what Jesus does not do when Herod mocks him. He does not break the silence to correct the mockery. He does not speak when the robe goes on. He absorbs the contempt the way he absorbed every other thing Herod could produce, in silence, in perfect composure, as the only free person in the room. He is on his way to a cross. Herod is a detour on the road to the cross, and even detours have a purpose. The purpose of this one is not the miracle Herod wanted. The purpose of this one is the question the silence leaves hanging in the air of that palace after Jesus is gone. Who is this man that will not speak to me? That question is the most useful thing that comes out of that palace. Not a miracle. Miracles can be explained away, assigned to the wrong source, forgotten by the next morning. But a man who stood before you with all the power to perform and chose not to, that man does not leave your memory easily. That question does not close. That silence echoes. There are three things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: curiosity without cost produces silence. Herod wanted a miracle, but not a Messiah. He wanted the sign, but not the one the sign pointed to. And Jesus, who freely gave his words and his power and his presence to everyone who came with genuine need, gave Herod nothing. Not because Herod was beyond reach, but because what Herod was asking for was not something Jesus came to provide. If you approach him wanting a performance, you will find the same silence Herod found, not because he is withholding himself, because what you are asking for is not him. The second is this: the silence before Herod is not the absence of words. It is the verdict on all the words that were already available and already rejected. Herod had years of reports from across Galilee. He heard all of it and came to Jesus asking for a private miracle, as if the public ministry had never happened. The silence says, I have already said everything there is to say. The question is what you did with it. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with: the silence of Jesus before Herod is the most merciful thing in that palace. If Jesus had performed, if he had given Herod the sign, satisfied the curiosity, Herod could have gone home that night fulfilled. He could have checked it off. He saw the miracle worker. He got the sign. He can go back to Tiberias and add this to the list of interesting things he has experienced. And the door closes. The silence keeps the door open. The silence says, I am not what you are treating me as, and until you are willing to treat me as what I actually am, I will not confirm your misunderstanding of me by giving you what you asked for on its own terms. Come back differently. Come hungry. Come desperate. Come the way Bartimaeus came, the way the bleeding woman came, the way the prodigal son came, not asking for a performance, but asking for him. He is still answering that kind of asking. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, I want more than the miracle. Just that. And if you know someone who is approaching Jesus as a spectacle, someone who has been hearing about him for years without it changing anything, share this with them, not as a rebuke, but because the silence of Jesus before Herod is not a closed door. It is an open question. And open questions are where everything begins. The one who would not speak in Herod's palace is the same one who speaks to everyone who comes to him differently. Come differently, he will answer. We will see you in the next one.